Hello, everybody. We're back for episode 8 of the Popcorn Square podcast, and today we're going to be discussing Aquaman 2. Neff here, of course.
Kage.
Buttons.
And we're all here for episode 8. I'll start off. Aquaman 2, saw this about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I thought the movie was a decent movie. I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. I thought the pacing was good. Of course, most of it is the same characters that you saw in the first Aquaman movie. I like the story of it, the pacing of it. I thought a lot of the costume design, the little details I really liked regarding that movie. Amber Heard did what she needed to do for the film. In my opinion, she was in the film as much as she needed to be in the film. I don't feel like they are over casting her in that film. I don't feel like they gave her more lines than she needed. Every part she was in was necessary. You could tell that the movie had been edited a little more. There were some strange cuts, but nothing too obvious. I thought for the use of CG, I want to say at least 90% of that movie was CG. Very high quality CG. So overall, I didn't think the movie was a bad film, but I'll pass this off to Kage, and then I'll let Buttons follow up with how they felt about it.
So Aquaman, I'm probably gonna give it a 6, maybe 6.5 if I'm being a little generous. Not to say that I hated the film, but it didn't really blow my socks off. It seemed like more of the same of the first movie. I like the first movie more. I like the setup, the origins of Aquaman, and going down to the depths of Atlantis and seeing, like, I like that setup. I'm always a sucker for origin stories, but this one, it's like, it was nothing to write home about. It just seemed like more of the same. You're right, it had a lot of CG. I mean, you're not going to show real life underwater neon stuff, so it makes sense to have that much CG. But it was entertaining. Definitely not my favorite movie, definitely not the worst in terms of Amber Heard. I felt like with all the negative publicity around her, I kind of thought that they were going to show her and something tragic was going to happen. Her character was going to kill off at the beginning of the movie, and that was it. I was not expecting to see her as much as we did, but to her credit, or maybe to the writer's credit, she was just like you said, Neff, she was in the movie for the scenes that it counted, okay? They weren't shoehorning her in. They brought her in to, like, she was in where she needed to be. And I'm like, from that point of view, I agree. I agree. Buttons?
Okay, so for me, I personally thought that the first Aquaman movie was better. Which is saying something because the first Aquaman movie I had my own, problems and issues with. I think the CGI, in my opinion, was a little bit stronger than it was in the first one. I'm sure there was a larger budget for this one, so that's probably where you're seeing that. But one of my biggest complaints that I had with the first one was it was kind of hard to tell who the real villain was. It jumped around quite a bit between who's the bad guy, who's the good guy. I'm confused. Is this the big bad, or is that the bad, person who's like the ultimate bad guy? This one, obviously, for those, spoiler, alert, that in the first movie, you have the relationship with the brother that devolves, and he's ultimately the big bad. But in this one, you had Manta jumping into that role now, which you were like, okay, cool, Manta's being brought back in. And I actually liked his role better in this movie than I did in the first one. I thought, it was a good way for the actor to kind of stretch a little bit and bring that character more to a likable character, even. What by likable, I don't mean like he was an anti-hero or anything like that. I mean, like, you were glad he was the bad guy. You could see why he was the bad guy. But trying to insert the characters that they had from the first movie into this one, I kind of see how they had too many moving parts, too many people on the board, and that was where it got kind of confusing. Yes, Amber Heard, her role and everything, she was there for where she needed to be there, And, you know, the other characters that they had in there, they tried, and this was kind of my argument with Ant-Man and Wasp, the Quantumania thing, because they're bringing in the parents too. It's like, who is this story about? Because you're like, oh, I have to make sure that mom and dad are in here, so let's give them little scenes here and there. And then you're like, okay. And then the brother comes in again and like, oh, you have this whole redemption story arc with him, with Aquaman and the brother, where they're like, oh, we're mending things because mom's like, get along, kids, you know, and
Right.
and there's like this one little scene with, you know, with Nicole Kidman as the mom, and you're like, and she's just like, now look after your brother, and she's like, I'm serious now, like, don't you go out there with him, and like, and I'm just like, okay, was that necessary? Did we have to have that in there? Like, I like Nicole Kidman as an actress, I even like her character, but I felt like it didn't add to the story. I feel like the story could have moved along at a much faster pace if they had cut out some of the extra characters. Same thing with like the scientist. I don't remember the character's name.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, they threw him a lot in there.
Right.
It's not that I didn't like his character, and there were definitely pivotal moments where you needed his input. You know, with Manta, the scenes with Manta, where you're like, okay, but, and he was a little bit of comic relief in there too.
That's what I was about to say too.
And I will say, as a little side note though, the jokes, I always have this thing with when you have real serious movies or real serious moments in movies and they throw in the corny joke as kind of like trying to ease the tension a little bit. Aquaman, half of the jokes were hit or miss. Some of them, great use, wonderful, fine, tension breakers. Others, I was like, no, that's just cheesy, and I had to dock him some points for that. But I did overall, I did give the movie a 7. I thought that was fairly generous for some of the plot holes and things like that bugged me a little bit more. I know, Neff, we talked about the costumes, and I'll just say it because the gold suit was weird, all right? The gold suit was weird. His classic suit, and even the whole invisible one, I had mentioned, I was like, ooh, that's cool, you know? And honestly, as far as comic relief goes, the little squid thing, that was great. Like,
Yeah.
That's where I'm like, see, this is a good example. This is where I'm like, all right, I love it. I love the
Right.
little squid guy.
Yeah, and I would challenge anybody that's like very critical of this film, objectively speaking, if you take all the bad press out of it, what would you rate the film? Because I feel like a lot of people rate this film based off Amber Heard, not
Yeah.
based off the film.
Right.
And I believe if there wasn't any of this Amber Heard drama, this movie would have done way better. Because this movie's pretty good, especially for what we've been getting from superhero movies specifically. But moving on, the
And
budget.
DC.
Exactly. Good point. Especially after The Flash. The budget was $205 million on this Aquaman 2 film, and the box office sitting at 279 right now. 279 million, that is. So it's gotten its production budget back. This movie's not going to be a success by any means, but doing better than the Marvels. I believe. I'm not going to say it's doing better than The Flash yet because I need to get The Flash's numbers. But if I'm looking at these numbers right now, I'm going to say it's probably doing better than what The Flash did. Buttons is doing some reconnaissance on that. Let's talk about the future of DC. We know James Gunn's kind of taken over the DCEU. What do you guys expect from that moving forward? I know there's a couple projects they have slated. It wasn't anything big. I know they talked about Superman. They're going to be doing a Superman in the future. But nothing too big from the beginning for the new DCEU. So how do you feel about that with someone coming in, taking over? James Gunn? He's got a good reputation. I know he worked on Guardians, right? So he's got a good reputation for just being a creative. And he's worked on a lot of projects that I like. Dawn of the Dead, like classic. But anyway, how do you guys feel about that? If you're going to go over and take over a whole new, I guess, era of DC, to not hit with some of the hardest hitters that you got.
Yeah, so for me personally, I feel like they're in good hands. I think they're in good hands. The Guardian movies, great example. I've enjoyed them. 1, 2, and 3, they're a good time. The CG it made sense because they see the hundreds of different types of aliens that, okay, I buy that. I believe that. It makes sense, you know, and it has that comedic relief. I think comedy kind of goes hand in hand with Guardians. It's not it has serious moments, but they're just generally a good time. So in my opinion, if the director behind that is moving with DC. I feel like he could put them back on the map. I think bring them because the Marvel movies versus the DC movies, Marvel is blowing them out of the water. Even with all of these mishaps, they're still blowing them out of the water. DC had Batman with Robert Pattinson. Surprised me. I liked it better than I thought I would, and I'm on board for the sequel for that.
Yeah, so they're calling that Elseworld. So it's DC, but it's not the DCEU. So they're going to keep him in the Joker, but it's not going to be part of the new DCEU. I think this is going to be a test for James Gunn. He's been tasked with working on Guardians of the Galaxy, and that was great, but he's never been tasked with taking over a whole universe. So I think this is going to be very interesting. Of course, he's going to be able to delegate, you know what I mean? It's not going to be all on his shoulders, but it's going to be interesting seeing that jump where you work on a trilogy to going into a whole universe, and now you have to balance a whole bunch of characters. I think it's going to be very interesting for him. Buttons, how do you feel about DCEU moving forward?
So I've, again, kind of like what Kage said, I feel like their movies have not been performing as well compared to Marvel. Now, I do think that there are the exceptions out there, such as Wonder Woman, especially the first Wonder Woman. The second one, though, I know they fell short on what they were expecting in terms of numbers. I will say I did look up the numbers for The Flash. Their budget was about a 200 to 220 mil, and the box office was 270. So I think they're kind of on par as far as compared to Aquaman's numbers. They're right there, pretty neck and neck.
And both had that bad press leading up, controversial people on set.
They did. I think obviously, I think Aquaman's going to pull a little bit ahead, but not by a whole lot. I'd be surprised if they make much more than 300, if that, if they even break that 300 mark. But as far as moving forward with the DCEU, I would hazard a guess that in terms of, again, what we were talking about before about studios knowing when to back off of these characters, I feel like DC will bow out first. I think Disney's going to try to keep pushing for these characters. I think DC will back off and maybe switch a little bit more to like going back to their classic animated movies and animated series. I do know that there is an animated DC movie that is slated to come out this year. I don't remember the title off the top of my head, but I feel like they're gonna push more towards that in the future because they're not gonna want to keep throwing these huge budgets out there trying to compete with Disney and then falling so far short on their box office returns. Now, with HBO Max, or just Max, however you want to call it, they've had some more successful shows, some more successful releases and movies in terms of that, and that could be what they push for. They might decide to start just kind of the way Disney has their own original content on Disney Plus. DC might kind of shift a little bit more towards that and start doing, contracted movies through HBO Max. And that might be what we see going forward for them. They might decide to start just, instead of pushing these to theaters, they might say, hey, you gotta start seeing these on subscription sites, whether it be Max or Apple or Netflix or whoever, Paramount, they're just gonna start partnering with them. And I think that would be a smart move. And even with Disney, it might be a smart move when they do decide to start scaling back to just make it more of a subscription-based release on these. Because if they already have these in production and budget-wise, the only way that they're going to make money is to get these subscribers who, even if they don't watch it, you're still paying some money.
From what I saw on the list that James Gunn had spoke on the projects that are coming out, it looks like they're shifting more to shows.
Oh, TV
and
shows.
Movies maybe eventually, but it looks like they're really focusing on TV shows to build out the universe, and then maybe movies second. I wonder how you guys feel about that approach. Should they just do movies? Because I feel like Disney and Marvel, they've always been the heavier side on the shows. And they put the movies out parallel, but DC to me has always been movies, not so much show-based, especially on Max. So I wonder how you guys think that's going to go moving forward if they do that?
You know what? I feel like the shows. I've watched some of the DC shows, particularly animated shows. They're actually very good. Suicide Squad, Titans. Those are pretty good. I feel like maybe in some way, feel free to disagree, but all the problems that Marvel has, I feel like this is a real opportunity for DC to kind of capitalize on that. You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, we might have some breathing room here. Let's see what we can do. That being said, if they focus just on the shows for now, and when the shows really start getting good ratings, getting good views, then maybe they can pluck from one of those shows and let's say, oh, we're going to make a movie. I would watch it.
Yeah, a couple of the shows they have here that I'm looking at, and there's no specific date, but Swamp Thing.
Yeah, that's a good one. I heard about
Yep.
that.
Creature Commandos. Maybe they'll do some Supergirl stuff. I'm not 100% sure. But once again, it's not like kick the door in characters. So I'm just wondering when they're going to kind of aim for that to really get people re-engaged, because you do need those big staples to get people believing in this. You can have all those shows that are like supporting, but you still need your Batmans, you still need your Superman. And I know they casted a new Superman and they got the cast together. I don't know when they're going to start filming for that, but I just want to see how they approach that, especially if they go shows first to introduce the DCEU. Buttons?
Kage made a really good point, which is simply the fact that DC does have a long-standing track record with their TV show superstars. Superman has had, over the years, several different, TV shows, and they've been very successful, run multiple seasons on most of these characters, whether you're looking at Superman, Supergirl, The Flash, a lot of these characters, they get the fan base behind them. What we ultimately end up seeing with each one of these shows that you look at is something happens either with the writing or with the actors, and you lose your fan base. And, when I was younger, I watched Smallville. I really enjoyed that show. It ran, I believe, 8 seasons. But again, I kind of petered off towards the end because it kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, you can only stretch this out so far. And, they tried to build it and lead it into the adult version of Clark Kent. And that's where it kind of got wonky, because for so many years he was high school Clark Kent. And then they didn't transition it well into adult Clark Kent. And I think Supergirl was kind of the same thing. Is they introduced Kara and they said, okay, here she is, and then they even brought in Superman, cast a Superman to play, to give more longevity to her character and say, okay, yeah, she can't be this 20 something forever. She has to branch out and get into where the comic books tell her that her character leads, because the stories get stagnant otherwise. And so I feel like DC has that long track record, and that probably is what led to the majority of the movies that we see now, is that I think DC kind of led that way.
Right. Outside of the bad press that Aquaman 2 got for a good reason, what do you think might have been another underlying factor for why this movie didn't perform as well as the first one? Like, outside of that bad press, it's kind of hard to think about it outside of that because it did happen. But what do you think? I think maybe the amount of time in between, and then also, I don't know if the reshoots were so much attributed to Amber Heard. Could have been attributed to her. I feel like they did more cuts than reshoots of her part. But I feel like, some of the news about the reshoots too, them just trying to get the production finished, I think that kind of hurt this thing as well. Because like we said, this was like Captain Marvel, where you have a movie, it hits $1 billion, right? And then about the same budget, and then you have a movie, bad press, made $1 billion first movie, and then can't do anything the second. So I wonder what else maybe went into that. You guys have any ideas?
I mean, I really don't know. It's real, like you said, it's very difficult to look at it objectively without the whole Amber Heard situation.
It's impossible.
She's too intertwined with it. Right. And speaking for myself, when I went into the movie, I had that in mind, but I still wanted to give the them do.
Right.
You know what I mean? For like the other actors, like I'm not gonna say, oh, this movie's crap just because she's in it.
You're giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Benefit of the doubt, exactly. And I'm like, I walked into that theater and I sat down and I watched it saying, you know what? Yeah, she's in it. Yeah, there's all this real life drama, but what can you show me? What do you have to offer me in terms of effects, in terms of acting? Is your story easy to comprehend? Is your comedy just at the right pacing, as you would with any movie? You know what I mean? And looking at it objectively, it's like, it was a good time. I don't say it's crap. It's not the best movie, but it's certainly not the worst. If I had a kid, I would have no problem taking him to go see that movie. You know what I mean?
As far as my personal opinion, the only thing that comes to mind besides that drama around that goes to the story.
Yeah.
And again, the reason why I didn't like Ant-Man and Quantumania was they had a lot of stuff going on and it seemed unnecessary. So with Aquaman, I do feel like some of the characters in there, some of the storyline was unnecessary. You bring in this character that's this ancient whatever, and honestly, you then start getting into what the ultimate message behind the movie was. And I wonder if some people were,
Put off.
judging it based off of, is this another movie? It's a big political, push to green energy and to how we're polluting the planet and everything else. And, the way that they introduced it in the movie was they're like, hey, we started it actually, we didn't know at the time that we were polluting. And so we shut it down and we stopped it and we said, hey, we got to lock this away and it's bad. And, we know it's bad, so we're going to stop doing it. And then for years and years and years, everybody was happy. And then the humans came along and started polluting again. And now we have the icebergs are melting and it's going to unleash this big evil thing, that we had locked away for centuries or whatever to protect everyone. And so I don't know if that could have impacted, because a lot of people nowadays are a little bit more sensitive to having stories that relate to global warming and, that kind of narrative behind it. And this movie did hit hard on that. That was ultimately the big bad. Look what you did. We're polluting the earth, and now you've unleashed this catastrophic force that's going to destroy everything. And so maybe that was a reason why the movie didn't do as well. Just because
Interesting.
adding
Cool perspective there. Let's turn our focus now, and that was a great discussion about Aquaman. That was great. Rebel Moon. I watched Rebel Moon. I know Buttons watched Rebel Moon. Kage, did you get a chance to watch that
not
yet?
yet, but I will.
So Kage is going to watch that. But Buttons, how did you feel about Rebel Moon? And that's Netflix, of course, right?
Right, yes, that's Netflix. So I did watch Rebel Moon, and my significant other as well. I think Rebel Moon is one of those movies that going in, it's a part one. And just as we've talked about with other movies where they're setting up characters and they're setting up this storyline, this background information, I personally thought that the way that they did it was engaging, was, interesting, and kept me wanting more. Like, I wanted to know what's going on with these characters. Now, there was a little bit of negativity around it, and I have seen some of the other reviews that people were talking about with this movie, and I will just say I feel like people are being nitpicky. I feel like there is, a lot of other similar movies and similar content out there that they're just trying to make a direct comparison to. And I had mentioned in our previous episodes that this movie was originally pitched for Star Wars, for Disney. And so you can clearly make some comparisons between the characters and actual Star Wars
Right.
characters. I'm not going to say, oh, this person was definitely that character.
Yeah, it's not a direct, but you can see the
Yeah.
inspiration behind
Exactly. You can definitely make some draws that, that would have been, this character, or that would have been that character if they had been Star Wars characters. But you could also just as easily say they maybe would have been new characters. They might
True.
have been, this might have been their origin of, their introduction into the universe.
Right.
And so with that, they did have some very strong symbolism with Nazis, which I think was kind of off-putting for some people. And I think that would probably be my biggest negative criticism of it is, you have this huge universe that they're introducing, and then you make a direct comparison, and even some of the costume choices where you're just sitting there going like, okay, you could not make it any more Nazi if you tried.
Correct.
Like, why didn't you just put a swastika on one of their outfits? But ultimately, I thought it was a very good introduction. I gave it a 6.5, only because I feel like, again, some of the choices that they made visually didn't align. You're like, oh, here's this whole fantasy realm, and then here's a business suit. And you're like, where did that come from?
Correct.
And that was really probably my biggest criticism.
Interesting take. I agree with you there, Buttons. I gave it a 6. Once again, like you said, and I'm going to piggyback off what you said. Part 1, let's see what happens in part 2. Let's see if they wrap it up nice at the end, kind of bring that story full circle, and then I can fully judge it on what it is based as a full idea. I can't really fully judge it now. I can only judge it based off what I've seen. And right now it's a 6. Decent watch. I can tell that it's like a Netflix production. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing, but I can tell the story, like we said, pulling a lot of inspiration from different places. There are some scenes in there that they probably could have cut out. It looked like they kind of ran out of ideas as far as the writing standpoint. Or maybe they feel we're not going to give you everything right now because we do have part 2. We'll see how they wrap everything up, though. But yeah, it was a 6. We'll see when part 2 comes out. I would expect them to actually put out part 2 before April, because I just feel like in the timeline of things, you don't want to wait any longer than that. You still want to keep it fresh in people's mind, especially when you're doing a part 2 on a Netflix series. This is not a big movie that millions of people are watching. I don't know the numbers on that, but I'm going to say millions of people are not watching Rebel Moon. That's just what I think. So you want to still remain fresh in people's minds. You want to put out that part 2. And then if something good comes out of that part 2, maybe the numbers come back good, then maybe they, continue with another story and they build a universe out of it. Because clearly, if you watch Rebel Moon, there's some spoilers here, they go around getting different characters to kind of stand up against the new empire, for what I'll say for now. And so you can tell that there's other places, other characters, other worlds. So I wonder if they do some other world building with that in the future as well, if these things do pan out. And Buttons just did some research, and part 2's coming out in April.
Yes, April 19th.
So
is
spot
what's
on
slated.
with my projection there. So I think that's a good release. I would have said April or anything earlier, but anything after, you just got to get it out there because people are going to forget about it, especially if it's something that people are already kind of putting in that box of this is not good. So from what I've heard, a lot of people have had some gripes with it. Like I said, let them do part 2, then you can judge it fully. Kage, you said you're going to be watching this in the future, possibly?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a big sucker for sci-fi. I'm all for it. Had a lot of stuff going on recently. Part of the reason why I wasn't here, so I just haven't had time to watch Rebel Moon. But yes, I will definitely be checking that out.
And I'm going to pass this one on to Kage right here, because this is a movie I don't believe me and Buttons have seen. Wonka, how did you feel about that, sir? I'm going to let you take the stage here for that one.
All right, I will not be singing. You're welcome.
And by the way, that's another Warner Brothers project, folks. I think that went under the radar, too. So they had Aquaman 2 and Wonka in theaters at the same time.
So, Wonka, I went in, I did see it. I really enjoyed it. I took my mom to go see it. She enjoyed it too. I won't lie to you, I didn't really know much about it. I knew that I liked the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I watched the Johnny Depp one. I like that too. And I went into it simply because it was Wonka. I've seen the other movies. I want to see it, so let's go. I knew that Timothy Chalamet was in it, the same actor who played Paul Atreides in Dune.
Yep.
And Paul Atreides, seeing him in Dune was my first movie ever seeing him. So I wanted to get a sample of his range too. So I was like, okay, let's see what this is about. First and foremost, I did not know that it was a musical. that threw me for a loop. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I didn't know Timothy Chalamet could sing, so that was a nice surprise. But the story was pretty good. The effects, the music was pretty good. I was like, okay, I dig this. The special effects, I think, were balanced. It was crazy because it's Wonka after all, and it had a nice, I want to say a heartfelt ending. I'd say it was really good. I think it's definitely a great way, in my opinion, to end 2023 cinema-wise. It's definitely up there with one of my favorites.
So Kage, just a question for you, because
Sure.
I have not seen Wonka yet, but I have seen the trailers, obviously, and like you said, as far as it being musical, I kind of, based off of the previous movies, there is always been kind of a stronger musical element to those movies. Again, the Johnny Depp version did not have a ton of music, but it did have a couple of the classic songs and a little bit of, a nod to the original with Gene Wilder. But as far as the Oompa Loompa
Okay.
So as far as that goes, in the Gene Wilder version, there was a ton of Oompa Loompas of varying, personality or whatever. They were individual people. Now, when you're looking at the Johnny Depp version, there was a ton of Oompa Loompas all played by the same actor.
Yeah.
There was just one Oompa Loompa like cloned into tons of Oompa Loompas, but all the same actor. Now, with this version, I did notice that it was Hugh Grant
Yes.
as the Oompa Loompa. Now, was he the only Oompa Loompa in there, or did they clone him? Was he?
So good question. Kind of yes and no. He was the main Oompa Loompa. Now they show not heavily spoiler, but they do show flashbacks to the Oompa Loompa Island, and you do get to see like a handful of other Oompa Loompas, the same orange face, green hair, all short, but predominantly it is focused on Hugh Grant, okay? And he's not in every single scene of the movie. I think just like Amber Heard, he's right where he needed to be when he needed to be. I would have liked to see more Oompa Loompas. I don't know if they would do a sequel to this. That would be kind of cool. If they didn't, I don't see them doing. I can go either way, because this, for those that don't know, Wonka is an origin story. It's
Right.
not just a musical. It's an origin story of Willy Wonka, of how he came to be, how he came into the chocolate business, blah blah blah. And they told that story very well. But I guess that's my only criticism, is I would have liked to see more of the silly Oompa Loompas, because the scenes that he was in was hilarious.
And just as a little side note here, Hugh Grant is another one of those actors who received a lot of bad press, and he's made his comeback, because you go back to like 80s, and he was in a lot of stuff since then. I mean, he had that, and then he kind of cooled off for a little bit, and then came back again, and then you had all this drama with him, and he disappeared again. And I do think he's trying to make that comeback now. Like I said, I didn't know he was associated with this project at first, and then when I was watching him, I was like, "Is that Hugh Grant?" I was like, "Oh my gosh, that is Hugh Grant!"
Right.
Oh, that feels like a good movie for him to try and pull himself back out of that stalemate that he was having with Hollywood. So I'm glad that he had a positive role, and that you enjoyed his character in there.
And a little fun fact, Wonka budget was $125 million. That's the total budget. As far as production goes, we don't know the marketing budget. We could guess 100 million, maybe. And the box office is 407 million. So pretty decent return.
Especially compared to Aquaman.
Right. It's not
yeah.
going to balance that out with Aquaman, because Aquaman's a big loss, probably $500 million or so. But it's a success, and Warner kind of played that kind of smart, because they had two different projects out at the same time at the holiday season. So
Hit the adults and the kids.
right. So that was a good game plan on their part. But I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Popcorn Square podcast, folks. Like I say in every episode, please like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell for notifications, and please join us for episode 9, which is going to be coming up shortly on our Popcorn Square podcast. That's it for Neff,
Peace out.
Kage, Buttons.
Bye.
You guys be safe.